This video is all about how a new or a relatively normal shooter can improve their performance. This is coming from a fellow normal shooter that has used some of these things to improve my own performance. I'm not a world-class shooter by any means, and we all can't be, unfortunately, but we can all be better shooters, and some of you out there probably could be world-class if you just get a little nudge in the right direction. We have millions of new gun owners. 2020 and 2021 have been rough. Our resources, time and ammunition, are both at a premium. So this video is a little bit geared towards how to make the most of those, especially for folks where the standard answer of, oh, we'll just go take a class with a reputable instructor isn't quite as easily realized as just hearing and saying the words make it seem, right? That's several $100s of travel, of lodging, of tuition, to say nothing of the ammunition cost and the gear associated with the courses. And it has to fit in your schedule, and good instructors are always in demand, so that is not always so easy. That leaves a lot of us, myself included, spending a lot of time shooting on our own, and we have to be able to make the most of that, right? We have to be able to do something other than turn money into noise, because we've all been on the range. We've seen that person, they're firing like shotgun pattern groups at 3 yards. They're having a great time, and it is their money, but they're not necessarily improving, and they're not necessarily where we want to be as a shooter. So my theory, what I'm going to put out to you, is this: improvement requires two things. One of those things is feedback. You need to know what right looks like and whether or not you're achieving that thing. And excuse me, I think I've messed that up. Improvement requires two things. It requires you to know what right looks like, and it requires you to be accountable for that. The accountability part requires feedback. So I'm going to cover a few different ways we can help introduce those concepts into our everyday training. The first thing, obviously, is dry fire. And that's where a lot of us make our money, as far as identifying what right looks like and then working through what right looks like, greasing the groove until we are now habitually performing rightly. Now, there are a ton of folks out there that have content that will show you what right looks like. You can look at guys like Rob Latham, or if you're more technically inclined, Pat McNamara, and a host of others that will show you what you need to see and talk you through it at the same time and get you on the road to right. Understand that some of this is personal. You have to figure out how to adapt the principles of employing your pistol or even your rifle correctly for your own physiology and for your own training environment. So moving on from there, the next thing I want to talk about is targets, because targets obviously should be part of our dry fire practice, but they're a critical part of our live fire as well. And every target we use should have clearly discernible scoring on it, because that's what keeps us accountable for where our shots go on that target. Yes, we should be working to call every one of our shots as we see where the sights are when we break it, but we don't always get that right? We don't always do it. So what we need is a target that is going to help us by giving us feedback. It's going to increase our accountability. Now, I've got a couple of targets behind me that are good for that. We'll start with the clean one. This is an IDPA target. Corresponds pretty closely with the Army's thoughts on where you should be placing shots on target. Again, 8 inches of clearly discernible perforated scoring area there in the middle where we want our shots to be. Your alternative to that, of course, is this one. This is an USPSA target. Can't call it IPSC anymore, can I? This was done 10 yards from the holster. You can see where I started to push a little bit faster than my skill level could handle. There's definitely some hits around the periphery. Like, I'm not going to deceive you about the type of shooter I am. This was working somewhere in the neighborhood of between 1.5 and 2 seconds, with an average draw of about 1.7, 1.8, depending on the specific weapon and how it was configured. Some good shots on there and some not so good shots. Worst one on the paper is this little D-zone guy over here. What does that target tell me? Target tells me I need to slow the heck down. And since then, I've actually progressed, and shooting at about that same pace my hits are a lot better. So slow down if the target tells you to slow down, right? And if your shots are not in the A zone, that's exactly what the target's telling you. If you want to go with something that's a little more practically oriented, this VTAC two-sided target, pretty solid. You can get it as a cardboard piece shown here. You can get it as a double-sided paper taper. It's got USPSA perf on it, and it's also got a slightly more demanding hit zone and center. The other real value to this is the bullseyes on the back, which are like a lot like the FR1 bulls in terms of size, because you should be doing precision work to reinforce fundamentals. And you should be punching X's at 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 yards. Now, the targets look fancy, right? The VTAC target in particular is a little bit on the pricey side, but the IDPA and USPSA targets are like 60 cents a piece, or the cost of any 3 holes on the target, right? If you can afford to train, you can afford 60 cents for a target to train on. And these little guys, these pacers, are like $5 for 1,000. So between a $5 box of and $60 spent on 100 of those targets, you can be shooting for a very, very long time and have an awesome tool to frame your dry fire. So definitely don't skimp on the targets. If you're the sort of shooter that just goes to the range, buys whatever they have in stock, and puts it up there and puts holes in it, that's not helping you out. You can definitely do better than that, and you should. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is this little guy. Now, you don't have to get this particular model of shot, but you should have one. It's not about being a slave to the timer, and like I said earlier, it's not about going faster. It's about keeping yourself accountable for your performance, and it's about being able to measure incremental improvement. So that 3 months ago, when I went out and I blew the target up trying to run about 1 3/4 seconds out of the holster, versus when I went out last week and ran about 1 3/4 seconds out of the holster, but was able to keep my shots in the A zone. I'm sure that target's around somewhere. That's how I can measure incremental improvement. So in that case, better hits for the same amount of time. However, if I had been working within my capabilities previously, what I would have seen is the time decrease. So there's different ways to measure it, and that's why having both mechanisms for accountability are important. Something I should have mentioned earlier is competing. I'm going to come back to it a little bit later, because right now what I want to talk about is planning. You should have a notebook. Whether it's digital or not, you should be using that notebook to record your performance, what drills you shot, how well you performed on those drills. You should be updating and revisiting that information. Because if we're talking about accountability and incremental improvement over time, we need to be able to see that. And unless you have an eidetic memory, you need it archived somewhere. So get a notebook, use it. And then when you show up to the range, have a plan in mind, whether you're going to shoot a couple of drills, whether you're going to shoot a specific course of fire. Have a plan. It might be that your plan is just how are you going to get meaningful training around the limitations of that range, because we've all been to a range where they've had one too many folks out there that maybe weren't as proficient as we should all be, and they caused damage to the range. There was a safety scare, maybe there was an accident, and now you've got a host of restrictions, right? Maybe you're not allowed to draw from the holster. Maybe you can't move. Maybe you're only allowed to set up one target directly in front of you. Whatever the case may be, there are ways that you can tailor your training to continue to improve your skills even within the limitations of that venue. So have a plan before you show up to do that. As an example, right, say you're at a range which doesn't let you work from the holster. You can't draw. Not uncommon. Well, you can certainly practice your draw at home. When you get to the range, you can work from your ready position with your weapon indexed to the target where it should be, out to the target and back. So you can continue to work that last step, that last piece of your draw, and you can blend that with the presentation of the weapon to your ready position. Is it ideal? No. Is it a lot better than just standing there with your arms extended and like mindlessly putting holes in the target? Yeah, it is. So again, that's what I mean by working around the limitations. Maybe you can only have one target right in front of you. It's going to make it pretty hard to practice transitions and breadth, right? But you can always put up one or multiple bullseye. You can move it a little bit closer. You can present onto one, you can present onto the other. So you can work different types of courses of fire and drills around your range limitations if you have a plan to do so, and if you've got the targetry that you need to support that plan, which again, don't just show up to the range and overpay for whatever they have in stock. That's not going to help you out. A couple of other things, we're sort of working from mild to wild. Do you do a lot of dry fire practice, or you just like digital stuff? One of these guys will do a great job of providing you feedback on your trigger control, the most important of your fundamentals during both dry and live fire practice. You may find that useful. The other thing you can do is you can get a red dot like the one on this. Now, my own experience with red dots is they are far less forgiving of bad presentation on a target, and the dot itself shows far more movement than iron sights do. So in that sense, bad trigger control or poor grip or stance or posture or things that are causing you to have to muscle the pistol on a target, all of those little mistakes that sometimes iron sights can hide from us a little bit, the red dot tends to make more obvious. Again, both of those things are not inexpensive. If you have the means, I would recommend you look at getting a red dot equipped pistol simply to train with, because in a lot of respects the writing is on the wall. There are increasingly larger numbers of folks that transition to those in the future. So yeah, the future is now, old man, right? So you might as well get ahead of that. Now to come back to what I mentioned earlier, competition. We all think we're pretty good shooters, and some of us need that big old serving of humble pie before maybe there are some things we need to do to improve, and then maybe there's some people around there that can help us, right? Especially for men, a lot of times our ego gets involved, right? Taking advice on shooting from somebody else is admitting they're more of a man than we are. Yeah, okay, whatever, get over yourself. It's got to happen, right? You can't do what you've always done if you want something other than what you've always got. So the competition part, right? Competition is a great way to meet really awesome shooters. You can learn by watching them, and they can put you in touch with the people who are worth your time in that direction as far as getting yourself some professional coaching. The other cool thing about competing is we talked about those range-isms, right? All those restrictions. Oh, you can't do the holsters thing, we don't do rapid fire here, whatever the case may be. Whether it's USPSA or IDPA, if you go out to a competitive shooting venue, you're going to get to draw from the holster, you're going to get to use cover, you're going to get to move, you're going to get to engage multiple targets, you're going to get to reload, you're going to get to work all of those different skills that a lot of times we just don't get to work at a normal range, at a normal time. And in that sense, it's inexpensive, right? You spend your $20 or whatever to buy yourself in, and now you have controlled environment where you're going to get feedback and critique, and you're going to be accountable for your hits and your time and everything else. In a lot of ways, it's an ideal. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, it's a game, it's not training. It's like, well, hold on. Just because it's a game doesn't mean it's not training. Just because it's a game doesn't mean you have to game it. Yeah, you can show up with a competition holster and gear and everything else, and you can spend a gajillion dollars on it if you want to. Or you can do what I did, which was show up with my duty pistol in a relatively normal duty holster with a relatively inexpensive set of mag pouches, put them on the belt you normally wear, and just shoot your way through the courses of fire. Why not use your duty gear? And in fact, if you're military or law enforcement, USPSA at least will allow you to use your duty gear for the events. Again, if you're there to improve versus there to win, you don't have to spend a ton of money on gear. You don't have to have the most tricked out piece of kit. That's not the point, right? The point is for you to improve as a shooter. So competition will definitely do that for you, and it'll humble you if you need it. I can remember seeing folks do things that, even though I watched it happen, I still wasn't sure how they managed to do it. So, phenomenal opportunity to learn shooter and meet a bunch of great people that helped that to happen for me. So to kind of bring it all back and recap, know what right looks like, be accountable for performing rightly when you shoot, have the resources, whether it's targetry or a good holster or a shot timer, and a plan to make that a reality. And you will see your shooting improve, especially if you take the time to put in the dry fire work and really build the mechanics, build the skill set you need before you ever go to the range. The reality is there's a lot of us that could stand to improve pretty considerably. I know that I'm one of them, and I work on that all the time. You can't as well. So, happy and safe shooting, hopefully better shooting.